We are now going to start a Gemara which discusses the laws of Chanukah candles, lighting Chanukah candles, more specifically Zman Hadlaka. When is the proper time to light Chanukah candles? This is the first video. It introduces the Gemara. The section of Gemara that we're going to do can be found in Masechet Shabbat, more specifically the second parak of Masechet Shabbat, which is known as Bameh Madlikin. Those are the first two words of the first mission in the second parak of Shabbat, and we are on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. Just as a quick introduction, the reason why the laws of Chanukah are discussed in Masechet Shabbat is because this parak Masechet Shabbat discusses which candles, I should say, what type of material and oil can be used to light Shabbos candles. And while it's on the topic of what oil can be used to light Shabbos candles, it goes on to discuss, what are the laws, what oils and materials can you use to light Chanukah candles? And then we get into a whole discussion about Chanukah. So it's actually all the Gemara related to Chanukah can be found in the second parak of Masechet Shabbat, again known as Bameh Madlikin. And again, we're here on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. The Gemara that we are going to do begins here where it says V'chavta ein zakuk la. Before we actually read the Gemara itself, before we read and translate and go into the specifics, we're going to give a little background information, and we're going to think a little bit about the things that we're going to see when we actually read through the Gemara itself, and see if we can figure some things out on our own, just get our minds thinking about the sources. Before we do that, if you'd like to take out the Gemara page that this is on, that has been handed to you in your packet, you could mark off the Gemara about where it's going to be. Again, it begins, if you count all the way down, it begins on line 12 where it says V'chavta ein zakuk la. It ends about 4 lines later, nothing too major. If you want to put in the punctuation, that's not a bad idea as well. You can just pause the video right now, put the punctuation in, and then we will move on. Before we go on to look at the information that's going to be into Gemara, we're going to look at a couple of words and terms that come up in this Gemara that are common terms that you'll see throughout Shas, throughout different Gemarot. So it's a good idea to focus on these so we gain information and knowledge that can help us if we want to learn Gemara in the future. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at the term, we're going to translate it literally, and then we're going to say how is this term used, so that when we see this Gemara, when we see this term in the Gemara, well, what's the Gemara doing at this point? The first one is uraminhu, viraminhu, uraminhu, which literally means the following contradicts. It always comes before a statement, and it tells us it introduces. It's a statement that introduces a statement that will contradict the previous one. So, for example, you might have statement number 1, and then you'll have another statement that contradicts statement number 1. In between that, you'll have the word ura minhu, and then you'll have statement that says statement number 2. So again, you'll have statement number 1, then the Gemara will say, oh, but the following contradicts that, and then it'll bring down statement number 2. It'll quote statement number 2, which is a contradiction to statement number 1. So again, Raminu means the following contradicts, and it introduces a statement that will contradict the one that was stated already. The second term that comes up that's important is the phrase my lav. My lav means does this not mean? And again, when we're using this phrase, my love, does this not mean? It's basically the Gemara's way of saying, of course it means this. Wouldn't you obviously right away think that it means this, right? Doesn't it mean this? Isn't it obvious? So it introduces what the Gemara thinks is the simplest understanding. Okay. Now this understanding is often challenged. The Gemara will usually say, well, doesn't it mean A, which is so obvious? And the Gemara will say, no, it can mean A for the following reason, so it must mean B. Just to give you an example, let's say I gave you the following statement. The weatherman said to take an umbrella today. So the Gemara would say, my love, does this not mean that it's going to rain today? Because that's the simplest explanation. That's the most easiest way to translate the phrase or to understand the phrase. Bring an umbrella today. The Gemara would say, my love, does this not mean it's going to rain? The Gemara might say, no, it actually means it's going to be really sunny and you should use the umbrella to protect yourself from the sun. Again, the simplest explanation would be the rain. The Gemara is going to always have a reason to switch it over to the sun. To the least simple understanding in this case, meaning that you need it for the sun. So again, that's how my lav works. Again, The weatherman said, bring an umbrella today. My love, does this not mean that it's going to rain? No, the Gemara will then say, no, it actually means, for whatever reason, that it's to protect you from the sun. The next word is de'i, which means that if. It's just a word that comes up very often. E means if, the daled means that. So, that if. Again, the daled is usually just the same way as shin is used in Hebrew. And finally, the last one is an abbreviation, Aleph Nun, which actually stands for E Nami. Literally means if also, but we're not going to translate it like that. We're going to translate it as or alternatively. That's offering a second explanation or solution. So again, you'll say, we'll use the example we had before. The weatherman said, bring an umbrella today. Oh, that means it's going to rain. Or alternatively, inami, it means that it's going to be really sunny and you should use it to protect yourself from the sun. So these are some important terms that are going to come up, and you'll see as they come up why they are important. Once we have the important words and terms that we're going to need for our Gemara, now we're going to look at a few statements that our Gemara is going to quote and analyze, and it would pay for us to look at these statements first so we understand what the Gemara is going to be talking about when we read through the Gemara. The first statement relates to, in some way, the time for lighting Chanukah candles. The Gemara says the following. Mitzvah ta, this is a statement the Gemara is going to quote. The mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles, Misha tishka hachama, from sunset, right? Shkiyat hachama, right? Shaka means to set. Mishkiyat hachama, ad until shetichla regel min hashuk. That literally means till the feet, the legs have stopped in the marketplace, otherwise known as some people have gone home from the marketplace. So statement number one is, the mitzvah of Chanukah candles is from sunset until people have gone home from the marketplace. So, there's a little bit of a vague statement here, and this is what I want you to think about for a little bit, right? What does this statement mean? Right? When it says the mitzvah of Chanukah candles is from sunset until people have gone home from the marketplace. So we have a time period. We have sunset being the beginning, okay? And we have, we'll call it closing time. How about that? We'll call it closing time. Okay, when everyone goes home. Everyone goes home from the market. They used to spend a lot of time in the marketplace. So closing time. And sometime during this period is what we'll call, mitzvah time. Okay, the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is some time in between sunset and closing time. What does it mean the mitzvah is during that time? What has to happen during that time? Take a minute, think about it, write down your answer if you like, and then we'll move on. And just to show you how this shows up in our Gemara, you're going to see right here, De mitzvata mishetishcha achama ad shetichla regel min hashuk. Here's the statement that we just quoted. The mitzvah is from the time the sun sets until closing time, until people leave the marketplace. So right there we see this statement quoted in our Gemara. Again, we'll have to wait and see to see how it's used. The next statement that we're going to see in our Gemara, which is important, is the following. It's a statement from Rav, or the opinion of Rav. Rav Kasava, Rav holds, Kavta, if it went out, if the candles were extinguished, if the candles go out, Ain, you're not zakukla, you're not responsible. In this case, it means responsible to relight them. So according to Rav, if you light Chanukah candles, and you light them the way they were supposed to be lit, properly, whatever it is, at the right time, and then they go out, the wind blows them out, someone else comes and blows them out, there's some kind of fluke and they blow out, then you are not responsible to relight them. You have fulfilled your mitzvah by lighting candles properly, whether or not they lit for a certain amount of time. It's irrelevant. You light them, they accidentally go out, you have fulfilled the mitzvah. And what you'll see again is that this statement is quoted in our Gemara. Actually, the section that we're going to see is from line 12 down a couple of lines, but if you look about 7 or 8 lines earlier, you'll see, to Rav Kasavar Kapta Ein Zakakla. The Gemara just finished, basically, getting to the point to teach us that Rav is of the opinion that if it goes out, you don't have to light it again. Then the Gemara here is going to quote this statement once again. See, Kavta Ein Zakakla, the Kavta Ein Zakakla. The Gemara is going to take this previous statement, is now going to analyze it. Before we actually move on to starting to think about how these two ideas might be connected, I'd like you to take a look on the worksheet that you have in front of you. It's asking you to think about these two statements together. Think about them for a minute. What's the relationship between these two statements? Again, the idea that there's a time period for lighting Chanukah candles from sunset until people leave the marketplace, and this halacha of Rav of Kavta Ein Zakla, that if your candle goes out, you don't have to light it again. Is there a connection between these two statements? Why would the Gemara bring these two statements in the same conversation? And once you have done that, once you've thought through it and you've given your answer, then you'll be ready to move on to the next part. So maybe pause it here for a couple of minutes, take some time to think about it, ask your neighbor, ask your friend, ask your teacher what they think, and then we can move on. You can move on in the video. Now, before we look ahead and see the connection between these two statements, I'm going to remind ourselves of the first term that we had before, and that was the term ura minhu. The following contradicts. Again, when you see the phrase ura minhu, what you're looking at is you have one statement, the word ura minhu, and then a following statement which tells us these two contradict one another. Again, ura minhu, the following, meaning this statement, contradicts what was said earlier. And that's exactly what we're going to see right now in our Gemara. And there it is. You'll notice the word ura minhu right here, and it's in between our two statements. Our first statement, that if the candles go out, you don't have to light them again. And the statement, mitzvata, the mitzvah is somewhere in this time period, from sunset until till people leave the marketplace, till closing time. And in between those two, you have the word, this phrase, ura minhu. So if I was going to translate this, I'd say, the kav ta'ein zakuk is actually a sarcastic question. Is it true that if it goes out, you don't have to relight it? Raminu, but the following is a contradiction to that. That the mitzvah is sometime between sunset and closing time. So doesn't this contradict that? So how could you say the kaptein zakla? How could you say? Is it true that's correct? You don't have to relight. This statement contradicts that. So the question we're going to have to ask ourselves now, we'll discuss this as a class, is what is it about these two statements that seem to contradict one another? What is this statement telling us, and what is this statement telling us? What's the idea behind it? And do those two truly contradict one another? Again, so just to visualize this a little bit better, so what we have here is we have two statements that we just saw at the beginning, and these two statements contradict. Okay, they at least as the Gemara starts off, there seems to be a contradiction between one another. When you discuss in class exactly how is it that this statement here contradicts statement number 2, how does this statement tell us that statement number 2 is wrong, right? Then try to figure out how could you solve the problem by maybe reinterpreting one of the statements, maybe somehow other way of solving the problem so that there's not a contradiction between the two. Again, that will be discussed in class. So make sure you have at least the first 2 pages of the packet filled out, because that's the information that you're going to need to know to have this discussion.